Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is session number 34. We're in Sonship orientation, and we were looking at a couple of verses here in Romans 8, verse 18. Let's just read that. I don't have it on the PowerPoint, so we'll just read it out of the Word. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. And then verse 24, which is on the PowerPoint, 25, which is on the PowerPoint. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. There is an intention by your Heavenly Father to make such an impact on us out of the verses that we're looking at. The reason I'm hesitating is because we have not really worked our way through all these verses. You've just heard me say things about it. I'm just trying in this session to show you an example of the exhortation. If when we get through with this, if you say, you know, I don't know that that's really in me the way it's supposed to be, you would be right, probably, because we haven't worked our way through this. So I'm just saying, don't panic over that. All I'm doing is just showing you about this exhortation, but it is something very good about it, and I just want to show you a little bit of it. We have a whole lot more to say about it when we get back over here. But if this really is working in you the way that it is, then whatever you go through in your life as part of the suffering of this present time, then that suffering is not going to be able to be compared with the glory that is going to be revealed in you after the redemption of your body. Remember, that was in that whole passage that we read there. So the end of verse 25 is going to be a reality for you. You will be able to patiently wait through anything that comes your way. The end of verse 25 is going to be a reality for you. You are going to be able to patiently wait. Now, I just want to talk to you about me for a moment, because again, I know we haven't gotten through this yet. And Billy will tell you this, that for me, something that I've had in my mind since Dad lived with me all those years and got progressively worse in his condition, I just saw that to a man that I had such great respect for and loved him, no doubt, that it was no longer who he was. It was him, but it wasn't him. And I've said to Billy, I'm sure 100 times, I don't want to live 1 second like that. Now, and she's heard me say that. Now, I want to tell you what this doctrine has done for me about that. Because my dad's dad had that, and my dad had that. It may be, I don't know how to say the percentages on that. It may be that I'll get that. It may jump me and get my sister. She'll be glad to hear that on the tape. That it doesn't matter that may be something that's out there for me. Because even if I wind up in the same condition as my dad, with full-blown Alzheimer's, sitting in a nursing home and drooling in my lap, I know this, that in a little while, I'm going to trade in this body, and I'm going to get another one. And I do say, when I say in just a little while, and that is, Paul is going to call it this, but for a moment. That's the way he characterizes it. And I've decided, if that's what I have to go through, I am being given something now I did not know how to give my dad. But it will allow me to patiently wait for that hope that has been promised to me out there. So you know what? That's not even an issue for me anymore. Now, you know, that used to really bug me and kind of, you know, make me wonder, you know. I even thought about, like my dad, who had all those heart bypasses done and it lengthened his life, you know. And I thought, boy, if they ever found that I had such blockage, I needed that, I think I'll just opt out. I don't get the Alzheimer thing, you know. That's what I was thinking. and now I'm thinking, you know what, if I get it, I've been equipped for that. Do you realize how powerful this is that we're being offered here? That it will equip you for anything that you go through. Karen and I were talking about just before, back when we were doing the fellowship, she said, my back is killing me and I can't hardly, function with it. But then she's talking about another guy who's a paraplegic and, and he's playing music on a piano with partial fingers on each hand because they're all curled and not able to function right. And he's, she's playing that music, and I mean, it's just beautiful. And you know what? And he's not crying in his soup. He's saying, I love to play the piano. Well, you know what? Your Father is saying this to you. I don't care what you go through, and I don't care for how long you go through it, and I don't care how bad it gets. And by the way, there are people in this room may go through quite a bit, but you and I both know there are people in this world that swap places with us in a second. There are some. All of that aside, for them and for us, there is a glory that is being held out to us that is incomparable in greatness and in majesty and honor and glory to that, and I don't say this disrespectfully, that little bit of suffering that we go through in this life. Now, I told you back when we were doing justification that your Father was saying some things to you to build a track record. That you were going to have to learn to take His word for some things. Because He was actually going to make some statements to us that there would be no physical evidence for in this world. In fact, everything you have been brought up to understand and know will be screaming in your head, this can't be right. And you're going to have to understand that until you begin to think like He does and see things from His perspective and understand what He's doing and why He's doing it, that when He tells you something, have you ever said to your kids, listen, don't ask me any questions, listen to what I'm telling you and do exactly what I say. This is important. Just do this. Have you ever said that at any point in time? And you know what you're really thinking is, look, I don't have time to go through the motions here. I need you to trust me on this. Well, that's kind of where you are here in verse 18. That this is one of those things I told you about back over in justification that your Father was going to tell you that you were going to look at and say, I don't see how that can be the case. And at this point, He doesn't care to make the case. What He cares about is, do you trust Him enough to believe Him? Will you take His wisdom over your wisdom? And that's what He's really looking at. And what I'm really pointing at here is that He has just told you that whatever you go through in this life, what is waiting for you on the other side is so great. And I'm not just talking about in being marvelous, but in magnitude. It is so great that when you get that, you will look back on anything you went through and no one will ever ask you the question. That's what Paul's talking about. Was it worth going through that to get this? He's going to say it's not worthy to even ask that kind of question. There is no comparison. It's like saying, do you remember the first time you got a bicycle? And then you say, can you compare with me the joy you felt when you had your first kid compared to when you got your first bike? You know what you would say? There is no comparison. How could you even ask me that question? This is a bike. This is a person. This is, this is part of us. How could you ask that? That's what Paul's saying. How can you ask? How can you compare? How can you even take these things that are going on here? Now, by the way, the reason he's saying it that way is because unless He tells us that, we won't know it. There's no way to know it. So He's going to say that to you, and here's my question for you. Do you believe Him? That's going to be the real question. Do you believe that? Because if you do, then that is going to start to make a difference in you that will result in verse 25. To enable you to patiently wait through absolutely anything that the sufferings of this present time bring your way. And it doesn't matter what it is. And so your Father wants you to have implicit faith in what He tells you. And I know that humanly, you'd look at that and you'd say, I just don't understand why God allows suffering to take place in this world. I thought God was a good God. And you know what His answer to that would be? I'm giving you something better than delivering you from the suffering. And that's the part human wisdom can't figure out. Because humanly we look at that and say, what in the world would be better than delivering me from this suffering? Or delivering my loved one. Let's don't make it a selfish thing. Deliver my loved one from this suffering. What would be better than that? And your Father, you know what He's going to tell you about that is? That's why you need to start thinking like I'm thinking, because until you do, you'll never figure that out on your own. That's why we need that. That's why we need godly wisdom, not man's wisdom, not the wisdom of this world. And that's why you can't get godly wisdom anywhere else. There's a list of things that I wanted to talk about here, and I need to move on because we're kind of behind. But when he says, is it verse 18? Yeah. Look at that third word. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time. Do you remember when we talked about reckon back in Romans 6? Reckon yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God. Remember that? What did we say about reckon? I was taught in Bible college, reckon means count it to be so. Well, that's true, but reckon means more than that. Reckon means count it to be of such a reality that it now becomes the basis from which you conduct yourself. When we use the speed limit for an example. Speed limit sign says 65. And you know that if you count it to be true, if you exceed the speed limit of 65 in royalty, you may get a ticket. I'm here to tell you. Reckoning that to be true means now you conduct yourself in accordance with what you believe to be true. Because just because I believe that's true doesn't mean I'm going to go 65. I'm here to tell you I now reckon that to be true every time I go through royalty. Yeah, right. Thank God. I'm glad you said that. Verse 18. He says, so here's what I reckon to be true that becomes the basis of my actions. I reckon that it is so absolutely true that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that's going to be revealed in me. When you get that promise, when that and the verses that follow all really do find a home in your inner man, then when you go through those things, instead of saying, oh God, you got to bail me out, you'll understand something else about what He is doing, and you'll not be saying, bail me out. You'll be doing that. You'll be patiently waiting. The illustration for this is when the Chinese were persecuting Christians in China, and they sent back word to their contacts in America, and here's what they said. Don't pray that the persecution will stop. Pray that we will remain faithful under persecution. They knew that there was something bigger going on than make me comfortable again. God was actually doing something more than that. Something bigger than that. And humanly, you can't figure out what in the world that might be until He tells you about it. And He is going to tell you about it. All right. So I just kind of needed to say that and to get that out of the way. The notes actually involve themselves a lot more than that, but I think everybody here certainly gets the idea about that. I do want to say one other thing about that sons of God thing before we get out of this, and that is, we talk about sons, and I told you that was the generic use of that he does, there is a son and daughter concept going on. But listen, there is a reason, though, that he chose son. I wanted to show it to you. It's in this verse in Galatians, so let me take you over to it. Galatians 3:26. For you're all the children of God by faith in Jesus Christ. Children of God meaning what? You're what? Yeah, you're part of the family of God, right? For as many of you as have been baptized into Jesus Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. Christ Jesus' relationship in the Godhead is He is the what? The Son. And since we're in Him, guess what you're called? Sons. That's why you're called sons. So, if anyone, if I was a woman and I ever thought about, gosh, I wonder how come God didn't, He's going to tell you, it's not about being male or female, it's about being in Christ. And since He's the Son, what a privilege it is then to be referred to in that way. That's the point of that. So, now that takes us back to Proverbs 1:2, where we're going to start to see that second concept that's given to us in our level 1 education. Remember, here's how that thing sorted out. In level 1, you had 2 parts to it, and you had 2 phases. And phase 1 was to know wisdom and instruction, right? And then now you're going to be made to perceive the words of understanding. And this is phase 1. And there's another phase to level 1, that's phase 2. And that's going to come in verse 3 over here, but we'll talk about that later. So here in verse 2, this is verse 2a, this is verse 2b, and so now we're going to begin to look at perceiving the words of understanding, because you already know what it means now to know wisdom and instruction. It means, first of all, to know that it exists and to know something about the value that it is going to have for you, how important it is to your Father. Now He's going to turn around in the last part, and He's not going to ask you to know something, He's going to ask you to perceive something. This is the thing, and that kind of takes you a step beyond just knowing it exists and knowing that it has some value, but now you're going to perceive something about it. And that's an advancement, by the way. Can everybody kind of see that? That you're kind of going from something that's a very general thing to now something that's a little more specific, something that's a little more focused on. And so, let's see, and that's going to, I think that's actually going to take us out of here, yeah. And now we're going to get back into this. We changed sessions here, and that's really where I should have been at the break. So this second part, let me tell you remember what this one was going to do? This one was going to set the son's attitude to be as excited about getting the education as the father was about giving it to him. This is going to combine with it to do the same thing. But it is a different thing that's being done, but it is for the same purpose. So these two together are going to work to set the son's attitude to really say, boy, this is just the greatest thing that I could ever be involved in. And it has to be that way because God is not going to educate anybody against their will as a son. He is not going to drag you kicking and screaming into the curriculum. And I know preachers love to tell stories like this, but that's not how God is operating when they say, well, God was calling me to the mission field, and I ran from God, and God whipped me, and I ran from God, and He whipped me, and finally I gave in and said I'd go to the mission field. That guy has no clue about the things that are happening in his life. God's not whipping anybody into anything in the dispensation of grace. You know what the thing about your sonship is? If you don't want it, He is willing. He's going to treat you as an adult. You can walk away. And He's not going to come back and cause your stocks to plummet because you did. Listen, I'm here to tell you You can walk away from sonship, and you may get a job making more money than you've ever made in your life. That has nothing to do with what you did about sonship. I'm saying the devil's not rewarding you, and God's not punishing you if you walk away from this. You have to want it. You all know that. We've been through all of that kind of issue. But the problem, the thing that I'm trying to establish here is that he is not going to force his thinking onto you. You're going to have to say to him, Abba, Father. You're going to have to want that. And not only will you have to decide to, if I can use this kind of terminology, to enroll in the education, but you're also going to have to understand that Satan has a policy of evil specifically developed to keep you from enrolling in this education. And this is the thing that I really wanted to get to. So let me see if I can't get through these notes here, because he has ways and means to keep you from hearing what you need to hear. Now, I'm not going to, look, normally... Look, I'm not browbeating anybody. I say normally I don't browbeat. I'm not going to do it now either. Like, okay, now I'll browbeat you. That's not it. Susie laughed like, yeah, right. Okay. But let me just be plain. If you don't show up, I mean, if you just say, look, I'm just going to take a break for the next 3 months. You're gonna miss what we do in the next 3 months. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say you're probably not gonna fill that in. You say, well, I'm not saying anybody here is saying that, and so if you're contemplating it, just don't flinch, and I won't know anything about it. But if you're saying, you know what, I think instead of going over there, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to visit somewhere else. You can do that. You're an adult. And you know what? That's your deal. It is. I'm not bitter about it. Your father's not bitter about it. My little funny thing wants to make comments right there, but I'm going to suppress that. But because I'm trying to make a humor out of it. But look, you have to, if you're going to get this, you have to show up. You know that. I'm talking to the people who do. You do show up. Here you are. I would say that I can count on one hand the number of times that just about anybody in here has missed. I get that. But there are people on the disc that don't automatically know that. And so I'm saying you have to show up. Not just in body. You have to show up ready to say, I'm going to hear this because this is what I want. The reason I bring that up is not to browbeat anybody, but to say we're going to be looking at a particular policy of evil that is designed specifically to keep that from happening. First of all, to keep you from showing up, and secondly, to keep you from mentally showing up when your body does show up. To let something else be the issue with you. That's why when you walk in the door, one of the things you need to be thinking is, this is what I'm doing right now, and this is where my mind is going to be. Not everybody's good at taking all the things that are going on in their life, and I'm really good at it. I can put it in a little box and put it in the back, and I mean, it just doesn't open up again until I'm done. I'm pretty good at that. In fact, I'm real good at that. I'm probably too good at that, because you know what? I just leave the box back there. I don't even know it's in the storehouse anymore. Which makes me, by the way, a great counselor. Do you know why? I never dredge up the thing. When people come, when a guy comes to me and he goes, I've just been a terrible husband. I just been a booger. The next time I look at him, I just don't think, man, that guy's a terrible husband. It just doesn't enter my mind. I'm not saying I can't remember what he told me, but I have to consciously remember that. I don't ever look at people in that way. I have a great forgetter. Sometimes that does not work in my best interest. But I do. I have a marvelous forgetter. And so that helps me hear a lot. So no matter what's going on in my mind, I can walk in those doors. I know you're thinking, I don't know, I've seen some days where it looked like you didn't do too good a job of that. But normally, I can walk in those doors and do what I've got to do. But here's the thing, the policy of evil is designed to keep that from happening with us. And he is going to do everything he can do believe me, not yet. I'm telling you now, not yet. It's coming to keep you from being here. If he can't keep you from being here, by the way, that will be a decision you'll make, then he will get you to not apply your heart to the things you hear. That'll be the next step. That you can, if he can't keep you from hearing it, let's just don't do anything with it. That'll be the next step. He has appeals and allurements and enticements that are meant to keep you from spending time with your Heavenly Father as you begin to get educated as His son or daughter. And so most people are going to fall victim to this policy of evil as soon as it happens. And for us, this group right here in Monahans, that is not very far down the road. And I do want to describe to you exactly when that is going to happen. Well, so let me just, just to make sure that I get that, I put that on the board, so I don't need to give that to you. It's just a breakdown of those two phases. And that brought me back to the verse that I wanted us to look at. But look, let me see how I want to say this. Let me see what I got left here. This is not going to... All right, let's do it like this. To know wisdom and instruction. Let's talk about wisdom, and then let me write this word out. He is going to cause you to perceive the words of understanding. There are words that He wants you to perceive something about that are going to produce an understanding in your own heart and mind. I want to talk to you about, I want to show you a little bit of the difference here. For instance, let's take, I'm going to give you an example. I need to illustrate this. This is a good way to do it. In the book of Matthew, in chapter 13, there are 7 parables that are given to you there. Those 7 parables concern the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says, and it says, and He spake another parable unto them, and said, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a grain of mustard seed. And that's one of the parables, the grain of mustard seed. Or, it's, the kingdom of heaven is like unto the leaven. And He talks about the leaven in the loaf. Or, the kingdom of, there's 7 of them in a row that are given to you in one chapter in Matthew 7. All my life, I've been taught about that, and I know from way back that when you get to Matthew 13, there are 7 parables. I can just about from memory, I could probably name at least 6 of the 7. I might miss one, but I think I could get them. But there's 7 of them. They're about the kingdom of heaven. There's different subject matters that each one of them has, and there they are. Now, what was I taught a parable was when I went to school? A parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Everybody heard that? That's what you get taught when you go to Bible school. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It talks about stuff that you're familiar with down here, and that's going to make you familiar with stuff about heaven. That's not what a parable is, really and truly. That's not... If you stretch all those words to the limits of what they could mean, you might be able to make it hook up, but that's really not it. Most preachers look at parables as stories that teach us little gems of wisdom. You ever heard that one? That's what those are about. When you know there's 7 parables, you know they're over there in Matthew 13, you know about the kingdom of heaven, and you know pretty much what the subject matter is, mustard seed and all that business, you have a modicum of wisdom. You know some things about it. Here's the difference between that and understanding. When you realize that those 7 parables are given to you in a very specific order, in fact, I may have put this on the PowerPoint. Yeah. Ha! I'm not totally brain dead. Forget half of them. When you realize that those parables are given to you in a very specific order, when you realize that they are instructions for the remnant in the day of wrath, when you realize that the first parable is given to you first because it's going to be utilized by the remnant at the very beginning of the day of wrath. When you realize those parables are meant to run in pairs, and when you realize that some of those parables are instructive at the beginning of the day of wrath, and others don't come into play until after the abomination of desolation, then you know what you begin to have? An understanding of those parables. I'm not saying if a guy doesn't recognize, I see those 7 parables, but here's what they are. They're just little stories. They're gems of wisdom. When you see they are actually specific instruction for the remnant in the day of wrath, and they're given in an order because that's the order they're going to need them, and some of those aren't going to be utilized until after the abomination of desolation is set up in the temple. When you understand that, now you're beginning to have an understanding of the parables. Until then, you had a little bit of wisdom about that. Yeah, that's why I say a modicum of wisdom about it, but you didn't have an understanding. That's the difference in what's going on here. We're going to be made to know some things about this education, and we're going to know, to be aware of that wisdom and instruction. But now we're going to take a little further step, and he's going to cause us to perceive some words that are going to give us an understanding. That's really where he wants to take us in this education. Okay, now, let's see here. Oh, yeah, there was something else I wanted to say about that, and that is that when you talk about perception, what is the difference? Tell me, what is the difference in knowing something and perceiving something? What do you think about that? Okay, so are you talking about now the to know part or the perceive part? The to know part? The perceive part? All right, is anybody else? It's a hard thing to put into words, isn't it? Did you ever look at something without really perceiving anything about it? Maybe I'm phrasing my question wrong. Have you, okay. Years ago, they used to have these little cartoons, and it just looked like a jumble of stuff, but if you kind of crossed your eyes and cocked your head and looked at it funny, a picture appeared. You remember all that? You could look at that without really the perception of what was there. Does that kind of make sense? When you talk about perception, if we were to use perceive in a sentence, someone would say, well, I'll just go back to saying it like I was going to say it. When you perceive something, there's an awe factor to it. You know what an awe factor is? That's when you really see it. When you perceive it. Have you ever been looking at something? In fact, every once in a while, I say something up here, and I see in your faces, you're going, ah, I didn't see that before. Have you ever said that? I've read that verse, I didn't see that. That's the perception part. Then when you read that verse and you see it, that's when you go, ah, that's perception. That's the part that makes perception different. And that's the thing that I'm after here, because it means you're taking special notice of something. So when he moves you from just knowing that there is a wisdom and instruction out there, knowing that it exists and that it has value and it's important, not just to your Heavenly Father, but ought to be for you as well, then you also now are made to put special focus on these words of understanding. And those words of understanding now are going to produce something in you that will actually carry you through this sonship curriculum. I was going to give you another verse. I was going to kind of give you an idea here. Let me just take you over here. When we talk about the table, look, do you remember we got this thing to know wisdom instruction? Do you remember where we said, where I carried you to show you the exhortation in conjunction with that? Starting in verse 7. Remember, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Remember that? So where's the exhortation that starts you off with perceive the words of understanding? It's right here. Oh, I'm sorry. Proverbs 2:10. Now you could make an argument, and I'd be open to that it actually starts in verse 1. There are some things about understanding up there. But look here in verse 10. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee. Remember, I told you, this is going to work to set the son's attitude. Understanding shall keep thee, and then look what it's going to keep you from, because early on, okay, you know, the way I arranged this today has just really not been clever at all. So I need to back up a second. Just let me back up. Just don't even look at that yet. And let me frame this for you. We are looking at the table of contents, which is the basic structure of adoption in any program. We are not looking at our exhortations here. We're looking at the ones that are given in Israel's program. Those exhortations are not doctrine. That's why we're looking at them. We're not going to spend any time looking at Israel's doctrine. That's not it. But contained in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs is the exhortation that goes right along with the table of contents. When you get back over to Romans, you're going to be given exhortations and doctrine that follow that same sequence that we have found in Proverbs 1, 2 through 6, that table of contents. You're going to see that all laid out in order. But my point to you is this. We have not yet gone to Romans to know wisdom and instruction. We're kind of doing that now. That's why we're over here. That's why it's sonship establishment. When we get back to Romans, we're going to begin to perceive the words of understanding. And this is sonship orientation. When we get back to Romans to perceive the words of understanding, that's going to be your sonship establishment. And that's a little different thing. But when you get there, this is the point I'm making. When we get back over to Romans and we get in there, and I'll say it to you like this. By the time you get to verse 39 in Romans 8, what's described in this verse I took off the screen is what is coming your way. And you have to understand, this is before you ever begin that actual instruction in learning to make judgmental decisions in wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. That's what makes you a simple son. So before you ever really turn the page to start now saying, I have formally started, you have started your education, but it's the part of your education that prepares you for what you're about to get. But before you actually start on the first page of the actual education, there is something coming your way. And that's what we're looking at here. Now let me give it to you. Verse 11, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from, and here's the 2 things, from the way of the evil man. And we talked about this a little bit before, only a little bit. Does anybody remember what the evil man is? It is the course of this world. It is the thing that Satan put into motion way back there long ago, that he does not run it, superintendent. He doesn't have to sit in the driver's seat. He put this thing into motion, and it is, you would look at that and characterize it by maybe saying it like this. That's just the way it happens. In a fallen world, in a sinful world. That's the way that happens. Look, let me do it like this. If you go to the shopping center and put presents in the back seat and you don't lock your car, what is likely to take place. You'll lose them. And do you know why? Because the world has worked a course to where now, even in a generation, things are now different. When I was a kid, no church locked their doors. We not only lock our doors, we had to put a light up here because someone tried to jimmy that back door open and bend all the framework up. The course of this world. You say, well, that was the devil. No, that's the what's happening with people out here is the course of this world. In other words, that's what happens in a world where people live the way they want, and then the next generation gets worse, and the next generation gets worse, and then things that used to be. We never used to lock our home. We used to go to the grocery store, and we didn't have air conditioning in our car. Can you believe that? I was in Louisiana, in Shreveport, and when we bought groceries, and we would stop and put all those paper, it was all paper sacks back then. We put paper sacks all across the back seat. And me and my mom and dad, we sit in the front seat. And if we had to make a stop somewhere, we never left somebody in the car to watch our groceries. The windows were down because it was burning up. And we didn't want the car to be in an oven when we got back. We went in wherever we had to go in, and we came back out, and all the groceries are still there. When we got home, nobody unlocked the door. The door was always open. That's the way that worked. The only time our door got locked was the screen door, and that was my mom keeping me outside from fanning the door open and the flies coming in. It's the only time the door got locked. My point is this, and I'm not saying that things were really good in the world then and now they're really rotten. Things in the world were headed this way. That course was already at work. But the evil man is the course of this world. And there are some things built into the course of this world that you are going to be faced with by the time you finish Romans 8:39, you're going to be smacked front and center with that. And the second thing is what it says, from the evil man that speaketh froward things. When we get over there, we're going to talk about what the froward things are, because it's important for you to understand what that is. But there's another one, and that's starting in the next verse. See, deliver thee from the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil, and delight in the frowardness, see that word again, delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths. Did you notice the use of that word all through there? That's why I told you it's important for us to nail down what that thing is, and we will. But now there's something else. Look at verse 16. This is the next verse, to deliver thee from the strange woman. Do you remember what the strange woman is? That is the satanic policy of evil. And I do want to say something about that, and I'm not going to take a long time to do it because we're out of time, but let me just catch up to where I am here in the notes. Why? Now, because the teaching style is Proverbs, then you understand there's a lot of metaphors that are going on here. In other words, he is not, because the teaching style is Proverbs, he's not talking about a certain man and a certain woman that's standing on the street corner and forgot the God of her youth and all that kind of business. He is talking about, because he's using that as the metaphor for the policy of evil, who is as alluring, all right, now follow me, is as alluring to an adopted son or daughter at that stage of their education as that woman that stands on the street corner is to the young man who doesn't really know anything. It's almost like that kid is so naive, he's going to be at her mercy. And that's almost the way this is being pictured, except your father doesn't want you to be naive. He's going to inform you about this and tell you about this. Now, there's something else that I was going to say about this, and that is, in this policy of evil, I'm going to say this to the ladies, so the men can go to sleep for about 20 seconds. Like the men can continue sleeping for about 20 seconds. there is a particular area of the policy of evil that is geared specifically and only to women. And it is to produce something that the Bible has a label for. And it is to make them a silly woman. Now, when the Bible, and Paul uses that term, when he talks about silly women led away with diverse this and that, when he's talking about that, he is not just trying to be critical of some group of ladies somewhere in some local assembly. He is actually giving you a specific descriptive phrase of those who have been victimized by that specialized policy of evil, that they have become silly women. In other words, and don't think of it as silly. Oh, well, they're just, they're never serious. That's not what that's talking about. That's a phrase that is something that is very descriptive. An educated son understands what that, you'll understand it too, but understands what that is and understands what in the policy of evil is directed to produce that. And as a matter of fact, instead of waiting until we get over to Paul's pastoral epistles to look at that, I'm actually going to take you back. We're going to get to something early on here pretty quick, and I'm going to show you some details of that because I want every lady in this local assembly to understand what the policy of evil has designed for you that will not work on any man, but because you are women, there is something specifically tailored for you. And we'll look at that. Now, that doesn't mean you're worse off. It just means there's something inherently about being a woman that Satan is going to seek to exploit. And if anybody gets exploited by that, not only will they fall out of their sonship, but they'll fall under that silly women category that postures them as being victimized by the policy of evil. Clifford must be making statements about silly women, so. So, anyway, we're going to look at all of that. So that's as far as we can get with this, and so we're kind of close to getting to the end of where we are. We've done all the verses that we're going to do, so we'll just stop it with that.